Mormonism comes about in, really in the 1820s and 30s is kind of the original time period. And we're in the Northeast and in rural New York. Joseph Smith, from a very young age, gains a reputation as kind of the town seer. And he and his father engage in this a lot and are even hired out and enter into contracts with people to form treasure companies. And, Joseph Smith would claim
And
to
this is
be
all
able.
documented, right, in
Oh,
history?
yeah. Oh, yeah, absolutely. Benjamin Franklin, in one of his papers, sort of comments on this phenomenon about these people who will go off into the woods at night, claiming and believing that there are these silver mines and golden treasures buried in the earth all over the place, and that they're protected by these kind of mischievous guardian spirits, and that you have to go through these kind of specific magical incantations in order to kind of bewitch the spirit and hold on to the treasure so that people can dig it up. And there's this very common phenomenon among all of them that if you screw something up, the treasure will sink deeper into the earth. Benjamin Franklin writes about this, almost 100 years before Joseph Smith. But in his time, he and his family and his associates are strong believers in things like dowsing rods. And not just, a dowsing rod, for people who aren't familiar, is you would take like a Y-shaped stick and they would hold it and it might twitch. Sometimes they would use them to locate water or something. But they also would use them to like locate these buried treasures, that they saw this as kind of a magical kind of gift. Another thing is the belief in seer stones. One can take a stone and look into the stone and see things, find lost items or see these treasures. Probably, I think the person who knows more about early Mormonism than any other human being on the face of the earth alive today, his name is Dan Vogel, who is an independent scholar and a heavyweight in early Mormon history. He has a series called Early Mormon Documents that is a collection of the primary documents of affidavits from people, letters from people, reminiscences from people. And it's very well documented that Joseph Smith and his family believed these things and did these things. And that so, he would gaze into his stone and say that there's a spirit that's guarding this treasure in a hill somewhere, and they would go to dig it up. And they never found anything, but it was always because someone screwed up. You have to keep you got to keep a sacred silence while you're doing all of these things. He's engaged in this practice through a kind of, I forget the exact year that he starts doing it, but certainly through 1823, 24, 25, 26, and into 1827. One of these treasure quests that he claims exists and that he tells his family stories about is that he says in a hill near his home, there is a set of golden plates guarded by a spirit there, this treasure. It's unclear at what point he starts saying that it has a record on it, that it has historical information. But him and a group of people are trying to get this treasure for a number of years. What happens is in 1826, Joseph Smith is arrested in South Bainbridge, New York, and taken to the historical record's kind of unclear, but he's taken to some kind of preliminary hearing before a judge, and there are several witnesses. Because there's a statute that prohibits glass looking, among other things. I think the technical term was that you couldn't be a disorderly person, but the definition of disorderly person covered kind of like palm reading and glass looking and these kinds of superstitious or fraudulent kinds of practices. And so he's taken to court. And the transcript is very curious because half of the people in his company believe this. And that's part of his defense is they're like, no, he's not faking it. He can really do this. We believe him. It's unclear historically how it's resolved, whether he's convicted or not. But it's a pretty big watershed moment for him. Around the same time, he has met a young woman named Emma Hale on one of his treasure quests for a man named Josiah Stoll. And her father, Isaac Hale, is very opposed to Joseph's manner of making a living. And he does not like that Joseph has taken an interest in his daughter. And Joseph wants to marry her. And Isaac says no. And Joseph and Emma run off and elope against their Emma's parents' wishes. And then there's a recording of a very highly emotional confrontation between Isaac Hale and Joseph Smith when they kind of come back from the elopement, in which I think it's secondhand, but there's a lot about it that's well documented. Otherwise, Isaac Hale sort of says, you've stolen my daughter, and you're, this scurrilous kind of treasure seeker, and kind of rakes him over the coals, and that Joseph promises him that he's going to stop doing this. By some accounts, he admits that he was deceiving people. And Dan Vogel, his theory, which I think is a pretty plausible one, is that it's in this time period that Joseph Smith kind of negotiates a way that he can keep his promise to his father-in-law, but also not give up this reputation that he has. And it's around this time that this treasure digging project converts and starts to take on religious overtones. And so Joseph Smith starts describing not a guardian spirit, but an angel, and not just a golden treasure, but a record that, pertains to the gospel, and that God has called him to take this record out of the earth and translate it. And so sort of bit by bit, this project kind of evolves into one of a religious nature. But when you read the earliest accounts, even of people who become close associates of Joseph Smith in founding Mormonism, who serve as witnesses to these golden plates, like Martin Harris, their early accounts of what was going on are sort of inextricably tied with this treasure seeking thing. Now, here's the real rub. I'm sure your audience is like, where's he going with this? This is where the big issue comes up. Okay, the way that Joseph Smith would scry for treasure, that's the term they would use, is he took a stone. Scry, yeah. Okay. That's what they call it. It's a scrying for treasure, is to look in these stones. And he took a stone and he would put it in his hat. And then
real quick, are these stones opaque or transparent?
They were different. The one that Joseph Smith preferred to use was opaque. It was brown. You can find a picture of it. The LDS Church actually took it out of their archives and put it on display in maybe 2014 or 15 for the first time. The issue becomes he puts the stone in his hat and he'll look in it and says he can see the treasure and these things in the stone. When Joseph Smith goes to translate the golden plates that he claims he has now taken out of the earth, the way that he does it is not by setting these records in front of him and looking at them and, translating them by some ancient language that he's aware of. Rather, he takes the stone and he puts it in his hat. All accounts of the translation of the Book of Mormon, as we have it, every single one of them, describes Joseph Smith taking the stone, putting it in his hat, putting his face in the hat, and dictating the words of the Book of Mormon while a scribe would write them down. When you're reading this and you learn about the history of kind of the treasure digging stuff, which I was like, well, I don't believe he was really seeing treasure. I don't. I don't personally believe that. But then when you see that the Book of Mormon was dictated with the same process, the same stone, it was like his stone. This is the stone that he used for treasure digging, is the same one that he, puts his face in the hat and dictates the words of the Book of Mormon. You're like, wait a second. Okay. That seems off. And that's certainly not how, in like artistic presentations you see as a Mormon growing up, that is not how it was ever depicted in like devotional art. They would paint Joseph Smith at a table with the golden plates in front of him. That's the impression that the church very much gave about how it happened. But that's absolutely not how it happened. And so that's very jarring.